Thank you for attending Worldwide Slot Car Chat number 46. I'm Greg Gabb, and today we've got John Kent and Luff Linkert and Petrucci, Leo, Mike, Big Den, Gio, Jeremy, Chris, lots of people, and let's chat. Anybody got any show and tell? I don't see any show and tell. Alan does not appear to be here yet. He had a plan for an interesting topic, so we can learn more about motors and their configuration. Hopefully he joins us, or maybe we'll do that next week. Since we were talking about it a minute ago, Petrucci asked a question. He asked, do any of your clubs charge money for anything? How much do they charge? Why do they charge? When do they charge? Petrucci, did you want to kind of talk about the situation you were talking about earlier so people kind of understand where that question came from?
Yeah, well, we rent a hall, and the guy that's renting the hall, he pays the rent and everything. All we do is pay for the race. But sometimes some of the equipment breaks down and other things like that, like power supplies and things. And he was moaning that the power supplies are too dear. So I bought him a couple of power supplies. So I said, really, you should charge a fee. What happened?
You hit your microphone.
Sorry. So I said, you should charge a fee, like, you know, because when I was racing RC, they charged a fee. You know, that's the reason I asked him, and he didn't want to do that. So some weeks he was moaning that he hadn't got enough money to pay for the rent and this and that. So in the end, he just shut it down. So that was the end of that.
Did he give you any reasoning why he didn't want to charge?
Well, he says some people can't afford it. So you ain't got to charge a lot of money, just something just to cover some of the odds and ends, because you can't be expected to pay for everything that goes wrong. You know, other people are using the facilities. You know, you need to just charge a small fee. You know, we started to race other clubs, and we didn't have all the equipment. And he was moaning, so I bought most of the equipment for him, like, you know, the timers and the power supplies and things like that. And the over the bridge you go through, like, for to mark up the tracks, because he didn't have one of them. So I bought all that for him, and we was racing okay. And sometimes things were breaking down, and he just got fed up. He gave it to his boys to run. They run it for a while, and then they just shut it down. So
I mean, it could have been a convenient excuse. You know, he might have been just tired of running the club and didn't want to do that. From my experience, you know, I'm involved with a home track slot car club that doesn't take any payment because everybody's racing on everybody else's tracks. You know, they come and race on my track, and we race on somebody else's track. There's no cost. But one of the things I've done, and I still do, is I run a laser tag club during the summers. You know, and I just go out to a park and I bring all the equipment. It's just consumer, you know, laser tag toy equipment. And I didn't want to charge any money for one very specific reason, and you know, maybe he's the same way, but as soon as you charge people money, then they have an expectation that, you know, you'll meet whatever need that they have regarding whatever service you're providing. So in the case of laser tag, you know, mom brings their kid and pays me $5 for a day worth of laser tag games. You know, maybe she'll come and get all Karen on me and be mad that little Jimmy didn't win any of the games, or you know, maybe little Jimmy's tagger malfunctioned, you know, so he's upset, and that, you know, I shouldn't allow that to happen. Stuff like that. People become entitled when they're giving you money for something, but also then it becomes more of a business, and you've got to look into requirements for, you know, local, state, and country taxes, you know, filing various things, getting permits and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no, thank you. I'll just provide everything for free. People can come and enjoy the fun of playing laser tag at a park, and not give me anything. But I did put out, I did basically say, if you are enjoying yourself and you want to help me continue doing this for free, you are welcome to donate batteries, because laser tag takes batteries. Those, you know, and that gets expensive after a while. Or just cash, or bring some snacks, you know, because I always bring, you know, water, because you got to stay hydrated when you're out there doing stuff, and something to snack on, you know, for energy. Sometimes people will just bring a pack of cookies, or sometimes people will bring a case of water, or slip me a tenner or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm
He
like,
supplied, he supplied like tea and Sam and food, like biscuits and things like that.
yeah. So I mean, he's got all these expenses, and I'm sure there are reasons that he chose not to ask for money. Though it might, if he opens back up, he might not be bad to say, I'll accept donations. This stuff isn't free to me.
He hasn't got in touch with me. I was thinking of maybe buying a hall or a large shop. I haven't found one yet.
Yeah, and then you're going to be in the same boat. You know, what are you going to do? Are you going to charge, you know, admission or race fees, or monthly fees, or, you know, and then, you know, how do you work that out? And if you charge too much, you end up with a whole bunch of money.
If I own the building, it's not too bad.
Yeah, you know, it gets a whole lot more complicated. That might be why I decided not to.
How many people were attending?
Well, when I first started with them, we had over 40 people. But then they started to dwindle away because their parents were breaking up and things like that. There's arguments between the families and that, they broke up. Then we moved to another hall and the numbers went down. And the last hall we was at, there was only about 15 of us.
That's still quite a good number, though. Yeah.
It certainly was. We used to have a good race, but what annoyed me was, you know, it didn't say, oh, we're not, no, it just stopped and that was it. So like, I got all these cars and I can't even get onto my own track at the moment because I've got a load of rubbish, load of stuff in the way. So, never mind, we'll get there somewhere, we'll sort something out. There's a few other clubs around, but like I'm in London and they're out in Kent. There's one down in Faversham called Vikings. I've raced there before. And the one in Watford, I raced there. But it's a bit too far for me to travel. So I just have to wait in here. There's someone on Slot Forum that's got a track at Shortlands, which is only just up the road. But I just ain't found out where he is yet. So I'm going to try and go there. I thought it might come on this Zoom like chat, but you never know. It might appear one day.
Does anybody else race with the club that accepts dues or charges fees for anything?
No.
I guess not.
Yeah, I rode to several clubs that, you know, we do dues. I mean, there's Nascot Wood, and that's a £5 to race every week, and that's Friday nights, 7 till 11. That's Watford. There's Stanborough, which is roughly the same.
Is that the one that Nick runs? Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, Dave Druce runs Watford,
yeah.
Nascot Wood, and there's one at Stanborough, which Graham runs. I've forgotten his second name, but anyway, I've got it. That's another one in Watford, very close. And again, that's £6 or £7 to run. It's in a school. There's the London Scalextric Club, which is down in Wood Green.
Yeah, that's digital, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's old classic analog 6-lane Scalextric sport track.
Is that the one in the back of the shop?
No, it's not. No, it's in a church hall.
Is it?
Yeah. And that's a good one. You know, that's definitely a good one. That's run by Steve Carter. You'll find that on the internet as
I
London.
raced at John Underwood at Oxford.
Yeah, I've never been up to Oxford. I've been up to,
because then the Dragon's doing the race circuit.
yeah. I've been up to Presto Park, which is in that area. You know, the Norwich area. Been up there a couple of times, but I find it's a bit tight because it's in a porter cabin. Everybody has their own chairs, and if you're a visitor, you don't get to sit down. So it's a bit awkward. But there are lots and lots of clubs in the UK, especially in the southeast, and there are lots of others that I haven't even scratched the surface of. And there's also in Milton Keynes, there's the racewars.com, and they must have at least 11 tracks up there, some digital, some wood analog, some plastic analog. It's really good. Lots and lots of tracks, and you turn up and you pay. So that's a commercial raceway, as Americans would call it. But yeah, club venues are quite common in the UK.
Big Dan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, the clubs that you know, the one in the south of our state, which makes it a 200 kilometre or 120-mile trip each way. They just charge a small nightly fee, but part of that goes to whoever's hosting to provide for the supper. So that hasn't got that as, and then the funds that are accumulated actually go into a pool. And at the end of the year, when we decide what our new class is going to be for the next year, it helps subsidise the cost of the car for everyone. So that's what we do. And in my local area, track about 10 k's or 6 miles away, just a small fee, $4 a day, and that just helps with the the running costs of, as Petrucci was saying, if the guy's got to buy a new power supply or something, and he rewired the track over at the Christmas break, so that just goes in. I mean, it probably doesn't cover it all, but it's a contribution we like to make.
It's amazing how quickly money adds up when you have several people contributing multiple times a year. But it's a good thing when you've got a venue and you've got expenses like that, for sure. And I love that they use the spare money at the end of the year to subsidize the next series or class or whatever. That's pretty cool. Go ahead, Martin.
Hey guys, we got a few clubs and we typically charge about £5 to £7 a night, but that's just to cover the hall hire. Anything that's left, we use it for prizes at special events, and so that's the same with all the local clubs around our way in Wales, and it works out quite well. You pay for the room hire.
Oh, you froze. Might have to go no camera when you come back, Martin.
Huh?
We lost you for a few seconds. You might turn off your camera so that your bandwidth can be used on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump off. Yeah, jump off and jump back on. There's something wrong with my connection, so I'll see you guys in a minute.
Okay. While we're waiting for Martin to come back and finish his thought, does anybody else have anything they want to add or ask about clubs that charge or don't charge? Or
well, it's a different cultural thing, actually, even in the UK, in the southeast and London. Some clubs, you pay your £5, and that covers tea and coffee and cakes, and that kind of thing. And they stop for a tea break. Very English, you actually stop for half an hour. Everybody stops racing. Everybody puts their gear down, and everybody just stands around drinking tea or coffee and cakes.
That's incredible. That's incredibly civilized.
Very civilized. Yeah, that's LSC in London. That's great. In Nascot Wood and most other clubs, they don't really stop. You just go and get tea when you want or whatever there is, and there's snacks in a fridge, Mars bars, that kind of thing. You just have to pay a nominal fee, 20p for a cup of tea or something like that. So there are various things going on. But when I first went down to Wood Green and they said, right, tea break, I was completely taken aback. I mean, even as an Englishman, I go there to race. I don't go there to drink tea. But it was a good way to stop, and chat and exchange information about cars and inquire why someone's car is running so well tonight, what they've done to it. Take your time to talk, you know, go look at what other people are doing. That's always it's always a good thing to do.
Am I muted still?
No, you're good.
Okay. Forever and ever, as long as I can remember, we've always had some sort of entry fees, and they differ for all the clubs. So basement tracks, it's a couple of bucks a time, and we have switched now. We race Sunday mornings, which seems to work well for everybody on probably a dozen tracks in and around the area. So the hosts normally provide coffee or bagels or donuts or something like that. So you get a coffee and a bagel and a donut or whatever you want. The clubs also have a bit of a secretary. So in the past, after a year or so, we've got, 12, 14 guys on a Sunday morning. And we've had enough money at the end of the year that if somebody has decided to create a new class or maybe an IROC series, the club bank account has bought cars for everybody to run in that. In the commercial tracks, they've always been, and I'm a firm supporter of paying at any commercial track because they are commercial venues and we are renting track time. But a couple of tracks have done a couple of neat things. The Ernie Mazzetti Race World series of tracks that he's had for 20 years has always charged an entry fee for every race, but half of your entry fee goes into a pot for race bucks. So at the end of the day, if it's $10 a race, which it normally is, $5 goes into a pot. And then at the end of every night, depending on how you finish, you get a little coupon for race bucks. It's not dollars. So you can, like, if you won tonight, Greg, you might get $13 or $14 or whatever it is. So that's $13 or $14 for you to spend in Race World on merchandise. So that works out really well. And then in the other commercial track that we've had for a long time, which is Mini Grid, they have an annual membership fee, which is $150 annually, which, seems like a lot of money, but they race every Thursday night, and every single Saturday, the track is open for club members for test and tune and shoot the shit and do whatever you want to do. So if you look at it that way, it's really quite inexpensive. So I don't even know what it's like not to pay to go and race slot cars, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, speaking of the snacks, like I said earlier, most of the clubs that I race with are all home clubs, and basically each host, each track host therefore provides the refreshments when the race is at his house. And sometimes people will bring refreshments, just so it's not always the host doing it, or when we race at a new venue or a commercial venue, for example, we'll pay for track time, but then we'll all bring some kind of snack or other refreshment, not expecting the venue to provide that. So yeah, I mean, it's always nice to have a little bit of refreshment on hand.
Yep.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. There's a 124th club that I belong to, and before COVID, we were racing on a regular basis. And what he does is he charges $10 per class per race. They'll have a Tuesday night race that is generally free, and then on once a month he'll have a group race from all around the area, and he'll charge, like as I said, $10 a class, and then pay out the money at the end of the time. And the guy has a fairly good situation. He rents the venue and owns the track, and he basically subsidizes it for the people that want to come and play with him, because he has no place else to race around here for sure. But and then he pays out the money, plus always adds some of his own to pay out, which is really kind of nice. So most of the time you end up breaking even Although down at the bottom end, it's not always that way, especially with parts and stuff. But yeah, it's a pretty nice setup. But of course, you have the general stuff with clubs of that style where you have a few people that are winning regularly, and that makes it difficult sometimes. But other than that, it's a pretty nice way to set it up.
Awesome.
So, Mike, when you say payout, you mean that who wins basically gets some kind of prize money?
Well, yes, you get prize money back. So, for instance, on the once a month races, so you're paying in $30 for the 3 classes, and you'll end up with he works out the percentages as to what gets paid out, but you'll generally at least break even. And then there's some extra in the pot for people that do better.
Yeah. One way to what we've done, one way to circumvent the same guys winning all the time, which is good for the guys winning, but not so guys for the guys not winning. Our 2 commercial our club tracks, everybody races, you're all in equal footing. On the commercial venues, we've divided the racers into A-class racers and B-class racers. So we all race together, but there is a separate championship and payout. So if you finish 7th or 8th in the race, you still could be the first B-class racer to finish, etc. So the payouts are split that way. So you normally get the first 3 guys, which are typically always the first 3 guys, but it does offer up, the 7th through 12th to 15th place guys an opportunity to get equal prize money in the B class. So it's kind of neat that way. And as well, we have
Chris. Do you ever get anybody who sandbags or no?
Well, you can, but I mean, what invariably happens if you win the B class this round, this series, next series, you're promoted into the A class. And if you're last in the A class, you go down to the B class, which also has some neat ribbing to it as well. Like during the races, you'll, say, hey, John, weren't you racing with the big guys last series? What happened? So it's kind of neat that way. And if you keep it light, it's a good way to do it. And the other thing, the overall club championship, if you're in the B class and you win, you get 10 points or whatever point system you get. You get exactly the same amount of points if you win the A class or overall. So quite conceivably for any given series, you as the best B class, if you constantly win your B class, you could win the overall club championship.
That's cool.
Now we all know that you didn't really win because you're in 7th and 8th. But we let you think you won anyway.
The winner of the non-winners.
Yeah, but it's neat because I mean, in any club, there's guys who take it seriously. There's guys who have more money, more time, more expertise, more. And you've also got a bunch of guys who just like to go out and play with slot cars. They like to do well, but quite frankly, if they're not going to invest time, money, effort, all the rest of the stuff, chances are they're not going to win. So at least this gives everybody a sort of a fighting chance to be competitive on the whole thing.
Yeah, I like that. Martin, did you want to restate your thoughts? I forget where you dropped out, so you might just have to start from scratch where we're talking about the clubs.
Yeah, I said or something like that. Yeah. No, just saying, very much like Alan says, in our part of Wales, we pay £5-7 something like that just to cover the hire of the hall. If you got anything left at the end of the year, we'll have a big meal or we'll have some raffle prizes. Or, we sort of distribute the money back out. We keep a float going so we could put on a national event. But yeah, talking about this as well. Yeah. We've got to stop for tea halfway because you got to tease each other. You gotta see what the other guy's cheating with. You got we tease and we joke, but we plan events at tea break. We also get little, the good guys will show us how they got their tires sorted out, or this is how you get your body float. So it's a little coaching session, and it's just a nice, relaxing fun because most of us have rushed to get there from work, and most of us aren't going to get home very early. So it's just a nice little breather halfway. And when we go to John's Club in Oxford, we go to the pub at lunchtime, and it's great. Don't we, Mr. Underwood?
Then do you go back racing after drinking?
Yeah, we do gruns, we do. Actually, here's one for Gruns, Wayne, and John, and Alan also. I've actually got the...
24 hours.
Yeah, 24 hours.
Get in focus. I went out and bought the Oxygen 24 shirt.
Represent.
I just bought it to tease the guys at club because I know they'll give me stick for wearing it. But that's me.
Anybody else want to add to that topic, or should we move on?
About drinking, you mean, or?
Alan, are you ready to do your motor setup presentation?
Yeah, now there's a question. I noticed that when you guys are doing presentations, I noticed Dennis could do this. He could share his screen.
Got it. No.
Okay, go ahead.
It wasn't me. Oh,
it was Wayne.
Has Wayne got something to say?
No, he had some background noise.
Oh, okay, that's okay then. So I'm going to try and see on my pad whether I can figure out how to share my screen, and then I've got some pictures to show you.
Okay.
So if I can't get that to work, then this could be a bit more impromptu because I may just have to do that. Right, share. Okay, maybe I can share. Okay, share screen. Okay, start now. Permission. Good. Right. Are you still seeing my screen?
Not yet. You disappeared, so it's obviously switching from your camera to screen share. If you had to give it permission, you might have to loop back and start from scratch again now that it has permission.
Okay. Well, I'll do that then. You guys carry on for a minute and I'll figure out how to do that.
Well, you might have to pull up the picture first, Alan.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Pull up your picture on your screen and then go back to share, like when I do it, and then I go back to share screen and it seems to work. That's the only thing I know about computers.
Are you doing it? Okay. Chris, do you do it from a, oh, there we go. We're getting something. All right, now we can see your tablet desktop.
Perfect. This is cool.
There we go. Cool.
All right. So after Dennis's motor expose last week, I kind of jumped in and said I'd do something. I'll just talk through the basic motor formats. And I think this is really not aimed at us guys, although it's nice if we just chat through this if you've got questions at the end. And discussion points, because there's always something, anyone can learn about this stuff. But it's probably primarily aimed at newbies who are watching this on repeat on YouTube, who are thinking what's going on with all this slot car stuff and what's all this different stuff with these different motors and different layouts. So that's for me. I'll talk through the major ones, and this is picked up off the Slotted website, so you can see that. We've got two inline short cans, top right and top middle, an inline long can, top left. We've got two versions of the Sidewinder, bottom left and bottom middle, and the angle winder to the right. So those are the formats I'm just going to be covering. I'm not going to be covering what I call boutique or weirdo motor layouts, and these are the two that really always make me chuckle. One I race and one I bought by accident. So the polycar gearbox with its lay shaft, that's not newbie territory at all. And the front engine, front motor cars, well, I'm not even sure that is a territory anybody can really make any sense of, even if you're an experienced slot car racer. So this is, these are bottom shots of what is called an S can, small can, inline, and these are slotted type arrangements. These are the bottom of 2 Group C cars. I think we briefly discussed yesterday that there's the end bell drive, that's the one on the right, and there's the can end drive, that's the one on the left. And this is typical of inline short can type cars. Slot it, arrange them like this. There are advantages to the one on the left, and Dennis noted this last week, and I agree with him, that if you're using the one on the right, which is how Slotted generally design these things, you're pushing the bearing beyond its tolerances. It gets hot, it's got nowhere to dissipate the heat because it's in a plastic housing, and the bearing is thinner, because so it's more likely to wear. But these are the 2 major short can inline layouts, and you'll notice that both of the crowns are what I call right-hand drive. If you look from the top of the car, the crown is on the right, and actually Slotted don't give you the option to do it any other way. This is what you have to do with Slotted. If anyone's got questions, just pipe up and we can talk about it, or we can wait till the end and go through a few things, however you prefer it.
Yeah, so Alan, about the inline, the one on the left. So that one is not the stock or standard that comes with the inline slotted cars, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely not stock and not standard. I mean, it confuses me how and why Maurizio designed the small can inline to look like the one on the right, because clearly it's technically inferior. Now, other manufacturers do this one on the left, but Slotted don't do. If you want to create something like this one on the left, you have to be quite handy with a modeling knife and not be afraid to use a lot of resin glue and create pieces to strap the motor and glue it into place.
So basically you're saying that, I mean, so does not exist the pod on the left. So you have basically to take one that is on the right and then basically glue the motor in that orientation.
Yeah, now the one on the right, Slotted advertised as a reverse mount inline small can pod, which sort of infers that at some point in the past, they didn't have a reverse mount. In other words, they did it the way it's on the left. But if they ever did that, you can't buy them anymore. But
they certainly did have can drive motor pods in line.
They were the very first ones, weren't they, Chris? And it's only reverted to the end bell version.
Yeah.
I think the first couple of Group C's had can drives rather than end bell drives.
The only reason I can think that they were designed this way or redesigned to be a reverse mount is it's easier to get to the mounting screws if you want to change the motor. That's the only advantage I can figure out.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some balance differences in the 2. The one on the left, the orientation of the magnets places a little bit more weight towards the rear axle. So depending on your track, depending on motor, depending on a lot of variables, you may or may choose to do that way. Yeah.
And so, it's one of those things. If your club permits you to do chops and changes and hack jobs, cuts and shuts, then, there's lots of advantage to be had by doing this kind of thing. A lot of clubs don't like this kind of stuff going on, but there you go.
Can anyone confirm whether we do or don't actually get much magnetic downforce from this motor?
What, from a small can? Nothing worth talking about.
No, probably.
Contradict that. I reckon there's more mag out of an S can than there is out of a flat 6.
Yeah. We'll get to the long can ones later, but yeah, this is
the reason I asked is because if you had the option to put any magnetic downforce nearer the back axle, perhaps that's what you would want to do.
Yeah, I mean, these are things to experiment with. What I would say is inline short can are kind of typically home-based cars, home tracks, because short can motors aren't as brutal as the long can motors. So these are a lot easier for people to handle. And actually, these particular ones, the Group C, slot it, they're very easy to handle, very smooth, very, you know, they're not troublesome. They're not like driving a proper beast. These are really easy to get around a track. They've got long guide base on them, the measurement from the guide to the back axle. And partly that they run these MX16 motors, slotted MX16s, and they're really not, you know, they're not brutal and not difficult to get around a track.
Yeah.
We still don't like them, so we take all the Group Cs and convert it to Sidewinder.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
We'll talk about Sidewinder a little later, but Slotted did produce some of these cars as Sidewinders, but they don't produce them anymore.
Yeah, just a quick comment for Wayne. Wayne, these probably will generate, depending on your tire diameter, anywhere from 4 to maybe 6, 7 grams of downforce. That said, there's lots of S-cans. The reason they call them an S-can, it's what was normally used in the early scale electrics cars. The nomenclature of the SC130.
It can.
But you can buy these with poly-neo magnets in, not these particular, not the slotted motors, but there are variations that you can generate 40 to 50 to 60 grams of downforce from an FC130 motor.
Thank you.
So there you go. It is possible to generate magnetic downforce if you're allowed to put, you know, open them up, put specific magnets in. So those are options, but generally we just like low power motors, and these motors are suitable for home use and small club tracks. But sticking with inline though, this is typically how Slotted arrange and Polycar arrange their long can inline motors. You can see the pod is pretty much the same setup, just got an FK130 motor in it. And again, it's mandatory right-hand drive. You can't switch the crown over. So you are guaranteed that you're going to have to run the motor clockwise in these cars, as you did have to in the other cars, the short-hand motors.
Sorry.
That's okay. And so, yeah, and it's notable that that these are right-hand drive only, but you know, Slotted aren't the only manufacturer. So this is how NSR arrange their inlines. NSR aren't big on inlines. They don't sell many inlines. I think they created a Porsche rally car inline, and then most recently they produced the NSR 8689 Formula car as an inline. But generally, NSR are an angle winder kind of company, so inlines aren't very common amongst the products they sell. However, NSR do give you the option. You can see I've got a right-hand drive and a left-hand drive here, and that's an Evo 4 chassis, the yellow one, with the bar across that's just in front of the crown here, and on the right you've got the Formula car. On the more modern chassis, that bar that's in front of the crown gear doesn't exist. I'll show you an Evo 5 chassis a little later when we're discussing angle winders. But the big thing to think about these is that with an NSR and this layout, you have the option to run the motor right-hand clockwise and anti-clockwise, which means if you're shrewd, you test the motor, you work out which way it runs best, and you install it that way. And then you'll get some advantage out of the stock motor. And although Maurizio Ferrari's idea that you run them all clockwise has some validity, because these things are produced in China by the million, and the machines that make them aren't very precise. And if there are errors introduced, they are introduced in the clockwise direction generally, which means that generally you'll find that running them clockwise is better. Which is when we get to angle winder and sidewinder, you'll sort of see how that plays out and how current trends are evolving with the motor layouts. Any questions on the long can inline? Right, I'll skip over to the next one, which is Sidewinder. And Sidewinder is sort of the next stage after the short can inline. And both of these cars were designed by Giovanni Montiglio. The left is a GT40 NSR, which was done during his time with NSR. And on the right is a Thunderslot Lola, a much more recent car. So if you look at, you should be able to see it. On the left, you've got a right-hand drive. If you look from the top, the crown gear would be on the right. And on the right-hand car, the Lola, you see that the crown gear has been moved to the left. And I suspect that Giovanni's realized that because the vast majority of motors run slightly better clockwise, that having left the legacy of NSR behind, he sort of thought, right, if I'm going to do everything from scratch, what are the things I want to do better? And he's put, you can see, he's put the motor in so that it runs clockwise. The growing trend with Sidewinders is to increase the angle. On the NSRs and other earlier Sidewinders, it was almost no angle of attack to the crown gear. The thunder slots are getting more and more of an angle on, to the point where some people call them angle winders, even though they're not really angle winders, but they're not directly and straight onto the axle. So these cars are quite good.
Alan, sorry, are you saying that basically the angle is increased now? I mean, because I know that there is a bit of angle, at least in the first two cars that Thunderslot put out.
Yeah.
But so is this angle going even more pronounced, or?
No, not since Thunderslot started making their pods, but the angle is increasing over time. You can see that the early cars with Sidewinders were directly parallel to the axle. The NSR had a bit of an angle. The Thunderslot's got a bit more of an angle. And actually there's a trend that's sort of growing now to start putting small can motors or S can motors into angle winder pods to get even more of an angle. And I suspect a lot of that is to try and push a little bit of the weight further forward, to get the center of gravity further forward.
Can I interject there for a second, Alan?
Yeah.
When angle winders first came out in 1968, the whole theory was on an angle was to, because of the size of the motors, if you put the motor on an angle, you can run the distance between the center line of the motor shaft and the center line of the axle reduces. So you can run a smaller diameter pinion and a smaller diameter crown gear, which means you can run smaller diameter rear tires, which aids handling. So the angle winder has always been, and technically both of these are angle winders. The NSR on the left originally had a 2-degree angle on it. If you use the proper long can pod, I use those a lot now with a short can motor. You can use really small diameter. As you can see, all of these cars have, particularly the one on the right-hand side, a really small diameter spur gear, which means you can run smaller diameter tires.
I mean, I don't have any experience as a Chris, but so I cannot throw dates out there. But when we're racing in the 24-hour Le Mans, so where we need to have like a lot of speed on the main straight. So Tamar was trying to find, the smallest gear in order to give, and the largest pinion in order to get to, what you say, a low ratio. So in order to have more speed than acceleration. And we decide Sidewinder basically is almost impossible to find what is the smallest one that you can get. I think should be around the 28. I mean, you cannot go any lower than that.
Well, one thing I didn't say, which I meant to say right at the start of this, is everything, you should assume from the off that everything between manufacturers does not fit every other manufacturer's car. All the gears are all different sizes, all the angles are all different. All of the spaces and the gaps, even in the inline, don't fit the motor shafts, even though they're nominally the same. You should assume that nothing's going to fit, and then you're not going to be disappointed. And that's been my approach to that kind of thing.
Yeah, another advantage of the angle winder, or having some angle on the motor and being able to run a smaller diameter spur, especially for any guys who run in endurance races. You can run a spur that will not be proud of the bottom of the chassis. So as the tires wear, you will tend not to nick teeth on the spur gear, and you will also, if the spur is actually even recessed, if you can manage that with your sizes, it's much more protected in terms of an off or a crash, which on a sprint race is, yes, certainly critical, but for a 24-hour race, even a bigger advantage.
Yeah.
Can I level another question back to Chris? You gave us some of the history of angle winders. Obviously, another reason why this design is necessary now is the length of the motor wouldn't fit between the rear tires as a sidewinder. But I wondered whether you talked about the reduction in diameter of the pinion and the crown, and sorry, not the crown, the spur, so that you could get them onto smaller wheels. That was going to aid handling, and I'm presuming that that's because the car will run lower and closer to the track. Did anyone back in the day build in offset to the axle, between the axle and the motor shaft, or was that unheard of back then?
Offset is, there's nothing new. Offset was in 1968. When we built chassis, you put the motor flat on the ground, built the chassis around it, and adjusted the axle height. And especially with sidewinders and or angle winders, the relative offset position is completely meaningless. The motor can be anywhere around the 360-degree circumference of the spur without issue.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I just wondered whether that was a done thing back then, because the main purpose, well, one of the main ways to get the smaller tire on is to change the offset, isn't it? Get the ground clearance, choose your tire size, and then that sets your offset.
Yes, you can, but the advantage of doing this is it gives you a greater selection in, as motors get quicker. This is, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We can do that but to answer your question, yes, the offset or an angle is basically necessary for a 32nd scale plastic car if you choose to use one of these FK 180 motors, just from a size restriction point of view.
Yes, yeah.
And Alan will probably mention it.
Back to you, Al.
You know, Alan runs predominantly on plastic tracks, where an FK 180 with long magnets stretching across the rails on the track has an advantage. On wood tracks at high levels, you will not see very few of the top guys running a long can motor, just because of the physical weight of the motor.
Yeah, and that goes to explain some things. I mean, the way I think about an angle winder is a long can motor, and it's an angle primarily because it will not fit as a sidewinder. So you don't get the opportunity to make them sidewinders. And you can see these three different types of cars in front of you. You can see that when NSR designed their angle winder, and this is the bottom of a Mosler Evo 5 chassis. And you can see that the angle is quite slim. It's somewhere around 15 degrees. And you can see that the Ninko next to it is somewhere around 20 degrees. And then the slotted, and this is the bottom of a racer sideways car, is 25 degrees. So again, kind of more modern cars are now starting to increase this angle, but I really don't see that we're going to get beyond 25 degrees where slotted have done this. And we were talking a little earlier about offset. You mentioned offset, and that's something I forgot to mention. Offset and gearing. When Slotted make these crowns, they make a set called an offset set of crowns that can deal with an offset up to 2.5 millimeters. and they're not colored, they're white.
Yeah.
But you have to be aware that they are right-hand drive only. You can't take one of those white crowns and do this kind of thing, as I've done with that yellow crown, flip it over. They're designed to run in one direction only. I mean, the idea of dropping the motor below the center axle center point is not new. The phrase, I think, offset and selling pieces that are offset and selling offset motor mounts is quite a slotted type of thing. NSR don't do it, NSR don't talk about it, but their standard pods that they sell with all their cars are offset to some amount. Think about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters. So, you know, offset's a common thing, but only really slot it, codify that, and sell parts that you can choose the offset you require.
But so Alan, if then NSR has an offset, how can you swap or move the crown left and right? It should not be possible, right?
I can answer to that. I saw a post on the Slot Forum this week, actually. I saw it this week. I think it was posted this week, posted by Maurizio, saying that his coloured inline crowns can actually handle an offset up to about 0.5 millimeter. And the other white crowns are the ones to use when you go 0.75 down to 2.25.
The main reason the white crowns were created was because slotted pods, especially these pods, these long can inlines, can take a boxer motor and they can take a flat 6. If you put a flat 6 in this same pod with the axle in the same position, the motor spindle intersects the axle at a much lower point. So in fact, if you've got a flat 6 motor running inline and it's right slammed down, that's about 2.5 millimeters of offset. And again, that was Maurizio quoted that on one of the forums this week.
I think that's the same post we're talking about, Alan.
Very probably, very probably. So inlines, I didn't say what they were used for. This is really the heritage of slot car racing, and lots of toy cars are still done this way. You know? But you'll also find this codified as part of DISCA, the digital racing, where they take these kind of cars and say, well, if it's an LMP1 or an LMP2, it's got to run an inline, or it's got to run a Sidewinder, an angle winder. You find this is still a very common format for people to use. And yes, and the angle winders, well, actually the angle winders, because they've got so much grunt, when you go up to the top end motors like the NSR motors and you get up to 400 gram of pull power, you can lift the front of the car if you're not careful. And there is an effect where the motor climbs up the axle and can deslot your car right off the start line. So it's not something that's easy for a beginner to handle or to deal with and to tune. But you know, that's just how it is. So, but those are the 3 major formats, and I've covered them using several manufacturers, including NSR, Slotted, and Ninko here. And I think that sort of covers it, apart from maybe these things, which we'll maybe discuss another evening, but not now. So those are the ones, and you know, having covered those, are there any other questions that come up?
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah.
Giovanni will back me up on this. You said about with angle winders, it's difficult to mix and match manufacturers' gears. Tamar did a very, very good spreadsheet explaining how all the diameters and the offsets of all the different spurs and crowns, and how the different ones would work together. It's quite interesting if you can get your hands on that. Do you remember that, Giovanni?
To be honest, I don't. But yeah, I mean, Tamar has a huge amount of resources. Yeah. So yeah, I imagine that he has something like that. I mean, the main thing with the angle winder, I mean, remember, so for instance, I'm using normally these plastic pinions that, again, I learned from Tamar. I think these should be Plafit or, you know, another brand. So they come like the 14 teeth is a blue one, then you have 12 that is a green, and yeah, and then I don't remember. So white, I think, and the 10 is green. So basically they have different diameter. So if you have to match with the ankle winder, you have to be careful the diameter of the ankle winder crown that you're going to use. So for instance, Slotted does same diameter, I think up to 26 or down to 26. And then they have another 26, 25, and 24 that are with a smaller diameter so that you can use a bigger pinion with that. So you have to play around a bit in order to know what you kind of can mix and match. And just to say, for instance, when we did the 24 hours, we're running Sidewinder with the short can. I think the Pinion was one of these plastic bluish ones, 14 with the 14 teeth, and as a crown for the Sidewinder, basically the crazy Dutch guy put in scale out or ankle winder crown that was 28. So in order to get a neat 2 ratio. And he said, let's try, and basically it worked for 24 hours without any problem. So we didn't know if it was going to work or not. So that was just on the spot. So basically, if you want to mix and match, you can. But
you can, if you, on a Sidewinder, if you just measure the distance between the center line of the motor shaft and the center line of the axle, that'll give you a number.
Yeah.
And with the various pinion sizes and the various spur gear sizes, all you have to do is, so if you've got, a 10 millimeter difference, you need, or a 10 millimeter gap between the motor center line shaft and the axle center line shaft, all you need to do is come up with a distance of 10 millimeters.
Yeah.
So that could be a 16 millimeter spur gear with, and I'm not doing my math in my head here, but you just have to go through the
16 and 4.
It's really easy to do. So you do not, by any stretch of the imagination, have to use anybody's pinions in anybody's configuration. You can use anything you want. They're all 0.5 metric pitch, basically, which is basically a 50 pitch. So NSR pinions will work with Thunder slot, which will work with Slotted, which will work with MB slot. All you have to do is get your calipers out and make some measurement differences.
Or another approach that, again, I learned from Tamari is that, again, you go with the knife around the pod. So start basically creating, so slotted pod, for instance, the motor is fixed, so you cannot really move. But if you use your knife, basically you can kind of open up the holes also where the screws go in, and then you can move a bit the motor. So I do this all the time. So in order to have a bit of a play, and then you have to have a feel for when you do the mesh, and then fix it with the screws. I hate to use glues, so I just do screws.
And some manufacturers are starting to go that way now, the same way Radio Control Card did. I mean, I think Black Arrow.
Black Arrow is the best pod ever. I mean, and chassis,
has a sliding. You have a slider for the motor, and you can get the gearing and the mesh just right, and it's really sweet. I just can't wait to get this on the track, and I just
which one is it?
There you go. I can't. This is the Black Bull.
Oh, okay, so the Lambo, yeah.
The movable motor scenario is coming back again. It was prevalent in 1965, and now it's come full circle again. Back then we did not ever have gears that are, most of the manufacturers play silly bugger with their gears now. So, and that was done from a production point of view. So Slotted said, okay, here's a Sidewinder pod. Guys are going to want to change gear ratios. We think that a lot of the modern guys are not, how should I say, technically adept enough to move the motor. So we'll just leave the motor and the axle in one position. and we'll just add teeth and subtract teeth to pinions and crown gears, or excuse me, pinions and spur gears, which is it,
Yeah.
to a point, it's okay. And I think I'd given you guys this little conversion thingy before, but for any metric pinion that you guys use, no matter who it's made by, to find out the perfect pitch, take the diameter of any gear you want, and this only applies to pinions, spurs, and angle winder gears. Take the diameter and multiply it by 2, and then subtract 2. So,
Hey, okay, you lost me, man. So let me take notes here. So it seems like we are at the University of Slot Car.
So take a 5.5 mil pinion gear. You multiply 5.5 by 2, which gives you 11, and take away 2, which is 9. So the perfect pitch, a perfect 0.5 metric pitch for a 5.5 mil pinion is 9. You can go down 1, no problem. You can go up 1, no problem. Anything more than that, and the manufacturers have to start messing around with the gear teeth and the pitch so much that they just don't match. And this is where, you know, Maurizio, bless his heart, he's not a slot car guy, he's an electronics guy. And when they first, you know, they were bringing out 11 tooth, 12 tooth, 5.5 mil pinions that everybody was screaming about because they didn't mesh. So another, if you have an 18 mil spur, times 2 is 36, minus 2 is 34. So the best meshing spur in an 18 mil you could ever possibly get is a 34. And on spurs, you can generally go up 2 and down 2 without issue. Any more than that, again, they start messing around with the teeth and you're into problems.
Yeah, I think my dad used to cut gears on a lathe for Rolls-Royce gearboxes.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of variable pitch would have sent him into a tailspin.
Oh no, it's
spat his dummy out and said, "What the hell are you guys doing?"
Yeah, anybody who's sort of when the first variable, all the slotted stuff came out, it's all done not from a performance perspective, it's done from a manufacturing and ease of user perspective. Very easy for a guy to buy a couple of gears and slip them on and they work just fine. But for anybody who's been playing for slot cars, you know, for a lot of years, like the whole concept to me that I can buy, you know, a 6 or a 5 or a 7 millimeter pinion with different tooth counts on it just used to, like, I spin around on that because we never had that. Everything was perfectly true pitch.
I have a question. Sorry, Giovanni.
No, go ahead, Dwayne.
Angle winders. Does using an angle winder spur cause a sideways force in the rear axle?
No.
Why not?
Because it's the gears are only meshing on there's no lateral pressure on that. It's not slipping, it's not sliding. You're not bottoming out the gear. If you are bottoming out the gear, you got bigger issues than that.
Yeah, no, it was based on assumption of a perfect mesh, but I just thought that the angle in the gear, because I know that gears push apart, would put a lateral force into a rear axle.
I mean, you should never bottom the teeth on a gear. So if the teeth are not bottom, there's only pressure around the circumference of the pinion and around the circumference of the spur, whether it's straight cut or angle cut. And
I'd like to take issue with that one because I see it differently, seeing as the question's been asked. When you have 2 gears that are splined gears and they're meshed together, when they're forcing against each other, they're forcing the gears apart. And so even if they're not bottoming out, if you have gears that are like this, they are forcing each other apart because of the angles of the gears. And so on a Sidewinder, you're not really producing any, it's a direct outward push. It's small, but it's there. And in fact,
Straight backwards.
Yeah, if you don't put your motor in properly, you know, just leave it loosely and you rev it, it will just drop out. It will never suck down onto the gear. It will always push out. So I would think that there should be some slight lateral movement that would push the axle one way or the other, because the angle of contact between the pinion and the crown is not directly parallel to the axle. I don't think it's going to be significant, but I do think there is going to be one.
Well, it would be significant if you got any lateral float in your rear axle.
Well, if you lateral float, lateral movement in an angle winder is a disaster.
It's a good reason to avoid it, because I think those gears should put a slight side load on the rear axle.
Well, if you have lateral movement of a spur gear in an angle winder configuration, you're constantly altering the gear mesh from too much lash to too little lash.
That's right, yeah.
So that's a disaster. Where with a Sidewinder, you can, so if I'm preparing a car for a proxy and it's in a Sidewinder, I'm not all that concerned over 10 races with getting a little bit of lateral movement in the axle, because it's attacking the pinion at a perfect angle.
Yes.
And no matter if I slide a Sidewinder gear from one side of the pinion to the other side, if I've got 3 mil of lateral clearance, my gear mesh won't change. A couple of thou of lateral movement on an angle winder setup will drastically affect the lash in the gear.
And that's what you should have these feeler gauges for. As you guys can see that's a slotted photo etched feeler gauge set. And that will allow you to make the right, not guesswork, the right gap for any axle installation. This is a really useful little tool. These cost peanuts. You can get them from anywhere.
Alan, are they all the same thickness?
No, they're not. No, they're photo etched in a 2D kind of thing. So you've got, when you buy the set, I think there is there are eight different ones you can get to judge it.
And for the metric amongst us, how thick are they?
Oh, good God, I don't know.
It's not written on there, no? Because although Chris says to me a few thou is a disaster, I don't actually think in thou. Never brought up that way, I'm sorry to say.
In a Sidewinder, Wayne, you've got lots of leeway.
Oh, in a Sidewinder, yeah, I grant you that there's potential. It wouldn't destroy anything to have. I would say up to about a 0.5 millimeter for a home user. That's achievable. Yeah. For an advanced slot car racer with that feeler gauge set that Alan's investigating and showing us there, that gets you right down into like the pro level races, doesn't it?
Yeah, these things don't have sizes on them, so I'm sorry I can't help you with that. But I'm sure that if you look them up, they're called slotted photo etched feeler gauges and washers.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. I don't own one, but I have used them.
Yeah, they're in the slotted catalogue. It says the size in the slotted catalogue. But you're saying about, Alan said that the two gears are going to push each other apart. When you got two parallel or angled axles, surely the gears are pushing downwards or upwards, depending which way it's rotating, not actually backwards.
No, because the teeth face each other.
Yeah, so they're doing this, not that. So
there is some. There is little. And if you have lash so that the teeth tips, the pinion teeth tip does not bottom out on the spur valley, it doesn't matter if it doesn't bottom out by 1/10 of a thou or a mile. It's not bottoming out, right? So there's no big pressure. Similarly, on an inline setup, the teeth want to push a little bit away because they're intersecting at 90-degree angles, but it's minimal.
Yeah. So what do you say is a very good reason to take the time to make sure your gears are clean?
Clean your gears. You don't need anything on gears. And when you set a gear mesh, never assume that your gears are number one, round, and number two, that you have put your pinion on with any rollout or run out whatsoever.
All right. Okay.
Most guys use brass pinions. I don't. I use steel pinions. I do not use plastic pinions. The chances of installing a plastic pinion or a brass pinion, while they're minimal, the chances of getting run out and not having the pinion go perfectly onto the motor shaft are much greater with a plastic pinion and or a bronze pinion than they are with the steel pinion. So anyway, when you put your pinion on and you have your gear, when you're setting your mesh, look for lash, check for lash, then move the gear 2 or 3 teeth, then check for lash again and go all the way around the gear. And you want to set a minimal amount of lash where the gears are the tightest, because they are not always round or concentric.
What we're seeing, 0.1.
So those tiny little holes on the spacers, these are the ones from Slotted. Maybe they stopped doing it. I don't know why Allens don't have it, but yeah, that's 0.10 where you see it's thinner in that rectangular area. And then I think it's 0.2, maybe 0.25 for the thicker area. I'd have to measure it with my caliper to be sure, but they're marked, just not very legibly. At least mine were. These were from years and years ago. I haven't purchased any recently.
Yeah, the later ones are etched. There's a little etching on them.
So Chris, just to get back to your steel pinions, do you secure them onto the motor with anything, or are they press fit, or how do you?
I mean, all of the pinions that I use in fast slot cars, for lack of a better term, they're all solder-on pinions. There's no such thing as a press-on pinion. For anything for a 32nd scale car, 99% of them are press-on. I do have some solder-on pinions. But the advantage of a steel pinion, and Alan's, was it your grandfather or your father, Alan, who made gears?
Yeah, my father, yeah.
Okay. Most of the gears today, a lot of them are laser cut or EDM cut. So steel cuts much cleaner than brass. It has a lower coefficient of drag than brass, and it is less susceptible to run out when you install it on things. So don't anybody think you have to go out and change all your pinions. All the pinions you have are just fine. But from a purely technical perspective, and if you were racing faster slot cars, you would never see anybody running anything other than a steel solder-on pinion. So, I mean, if you have a brass pinion today and you're racing your slotted car around and you said, oh, Chris told me to change to a steel pinion, and you put it on, there's a 99% chance nothing will happen. It's not going to be any difference. But from a purely technical perspective, steel pinions are the way to go.
I just kind of want to mention the shims that we're talking about were for making sure there is enough, I don't want to say play, but enough tiny little space, a hair's width of space between the wheel or the gear or whatever, and the bushings and stuff on a rear axle assembly, typically on a potted car or whatever kind of car you're putting it together on. And the thing to remember for those new users out there, and you'll probably discover this on your own using it for the first time, is you basically have things loose that need to be moved in, usually the wheels or just one wheel, and then you put the shim in between the wheel and the bushing or whatever you're putting it in between, and very gently apply force, leaving the shim in place, and then tighten whatever is loose, and then pull the shim out, and you should have just enough for it to be low friction and function. Don't squeeze them, because if you squeeze them, you might actually compress the bearing holders inwards, and they'll just spring back out, and that shim will have done nothing useful. So gentle force to hold the shim in place, screw it tight, pull the shim out, and you should be good to go.
The what was I going to say here? Yeah, it's the snugger you can get everything, the better it is. So that starts with making sure your rear bushings are perfectly aligned. If your bushings are perfectly aligned and the axle spins very freely, you do not have to leave it with as much lateral play or anything like that. So bushing faces have to be flat, parallel. And I don't use shims. I never have. I haven't used them in 50 years. I just, when I set up the axle, I sense, you can sort of sense a little bit of lateral movement as opposed to actually see the lateral movement.
So Chris, what you're using is the shaman approach then?
Well, no, I mean, you don't have to do it that much. And again, it depends on what you're using. For bushings, it's a little bit different than ball bearings. Ball bearings, you just ram the wheel, you can put them in snug because the whole ball race spins.
Okay, I have to ask though, in the 60s for inline gear mesh tolerances, did you guys really use cigarette papers?
We used cigarette papers. We used bits of, saran wrap type stuff. But what we quickly figured out was, and if you put some of the older gears on an axle and just let them spin and spin them with your finger, they're not perfectly straight. Crown gears need to be, the teeth all need to be perfectly flat with each other. A crown gear does not need to be concentric. It can actually be egg-shaped because the teeth just move in and out on the pinion as it's going around.
Oh, so yeah, so the shape of the gear isn't vital. It's actually the teeth that they mesh. That's what's vital.
It's not as critical on an inline setup.
Oh.
We'll just move forward and aft along the pinion. If it was egg-shaped or not mounted perfectly centrally, it would just move forward and backward slightly.
Correct.
in the car, and it would just move along the teeth on the pinion. However, the balance would be awful.
It would be, but the balance is considering the balance of most cars and the fact that most guys don't balance them other than open class wing racers, it's really not that critical. Now the opposite is the opposite's true on a Sidewinder. A Sidewinder gear and pinion need to be perfectly concentric. But if a Sidewinder pinion has some run out as it's going around, the teeth will only wander a little bit from the outside of the pinion to the inside of the pinion. As long as that gear is round, it doesn't matter as much. Now, in a perfect world, you want to test all your gears and look for the best ones and all the rest of the stuff. But pretty well most of the pinions have a little bit of deviation to them. So when you're setting up your mesh, don't assume that one position between the pinion and the spur is consistent all the way around. So check it, move it 2 or 3 teeth, try it again, 2 or 3 more teeth, try it again, and you set the lash on. You set lash on the tightest interface that you can find all the way around.
Can I go back to angle winders and sidewinders again? With another helicopter question that starts high in the sky, and hopefully we get it down to the ground with the answer. Alan showed us angle winder pods and cars that were driving both the rear left and the rear right side of the car. Now, why have the designers chosen to do what they did in those cases? Is it okay to drive both the left rear wheel or the right rear wheel? Does it make any difference?
From a performance perspective, absolutely. Like from a pure performance mechanical perspective, absolutely not, because you're driving a solid axle. So the axle doesn't really know, because it's solid, if the gear's on the left hand or the right hand side. So that's basically irrelevant. The only difference in Alan's version was, does the motor spin clockwise at the can end or counterclockwise at the can end? most every motor that is used in the type of plastic cars we use today are mass-produced motors meant to be used in a variety, either counterclockwise or clockwise rotations by the end user. So the COM is generally zero timed. Having said that, they're mass-produced motors for 10 or 15 cents a piece, and sometimes they do run a little bit better in one direction than the other.
I think Alan suggested earlier that clockwise, if there's an error, it's normally a clockwise error.
I've confirmed that that's what I've been told by a couple of retailers and wholesalers and manufacturers, that if errors are introduced into the motors, it's generally in the clockwise direction. And that is my finding. I mean, my findings are that, for example, the NSR long can motors, the King motors, of the ones I've tested, the vast majority run slightly better clockwise. If there's an error, if it isn't zero, it's biased clockwise, which is clearly wrong for an NSR angle winder car. So clearly NSR are not getting these motors made to specification, they're just buying them en masse. And the errors are produced. And the thing about any of these things is test the motor, work out which way it runs best, and find a way to put it in a car that makes the best of what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
What's it take to them to figure out which way they run best? I mean, I don't have a tachometer.
Well,
that is screwed, Greg. You need one, man.
Go through that next week, okay? Next week.
Okay, get a tachometer. Gotcha.
Once
can you run it up and listen to it? Does that tell you anything real or
nothing? Tells you nothing. And
yeah, sure.
Once you've determined which way the motor runs, do not run it the other way. Run it, once you've run a motor in one direction, keep it running that direction. The motor brushes, depending on the rotation of the COM, will develop, the leading edge will be very, very blunt, and the trailing edge will be very tapered. If you tend to reverse the direction, the tapered end can be weak and can crack off.
Well, we're talking about a significant amount of running there to fully seat the brushes, aren't we? We're not talking about a new one out the packet.
No, but I mean, once you've ascertained that, this is going to run CCW at the counterclockwise at the can end or whatever, and you put it in a car and you've run a few races, don't go, okay, now I'm going to use this motor in a different direction.
Yeah, but determining the best direction to run a particular motor isn't going to harm it significantly to run it.
Not really. That minute. Let me show you something here. This is typically what you can get for less than £10.
Yep.
I have one of those.
Yeah, I have that one as well.
My eyes. Oh yeah, we sure through the internet. Exterminate.
It burns. But the difficult part of using one of those is finding a nice little disc that's got a 2mm diameter hole in that's perfectly balanced that you can pop on the end of your motor.
Yeah, I use basically what's the inline.
Very
something
easy
like
to do.
yeah,
exactly. An inline one, a disc, a bit, a bit of glue, and the tape, the reflective tape that comes with the tachometer. Job done. It's really easy to fix. Testing revs is easy. Testing torque is more difficult. But
they're correct.
Another time.
Yeah, one of the most or the worst, let's say, motors with these kind of that are non-neutral, for instance, are the scale out or the baby sprinter, the one that we use for GT3. So never go to a GT3 disc race with an NSR orientation because you're gonna lose 1,000 RPMs.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
The scale auto motors generally are more prone to clockwise twisting as part of the manufacture than any other motor I've come across. The Sprinter 2, the SC25 is very, very biased clockwise. So I think I have about 10 of those motors, and at least 6 of them are quite solidly clockwise biased. And one of them is a total mutant that if I couldn't prove that it hadn't been opened, it would look like I'd been cheating for sure.
What you showing off, Petrucci?
Sorry?
You're muted.
Want to test the
There you
torque motor? You see it?
I see a thing.
We've got a little gadget there. Screw the motor in. You put this gadget on, and it presses down on the scales.
Oh, to do torque?
Yeah.
So you may using a set of digital weigh scales and a locked out motor with a long arm. I presume is that a 1 inch long arm, Petrucci?
Yeah. And it's the scale.
So you can measure. Well, it won't be 1 inch, will it? Is it 20? What is it? 2 centimeters? I don't know. You've got to multiply. You've got to do some maths with the results, haven't you? You've got to then take into consideration the length of your arm, how many grams you scored on the scale. And I think that's exactly the way yours works, isn't it, Alan?
And actually, I found that a 10 centimeter toothpick or, stick is best, because 10 centimeter allows you to divide by 10 and you're good to go. Yeah. When you're doing torque testing, stall testing, so I said we weren't going to talk about this tonight, but we are now, aren't we? Do not stall test your motor at 12 volts. Just don't even go there. Probably 3 or 4 volts is the right thing to do, and then multiply the numbers up from there. You also have to test through the whole rotation of the stack, and take the biggest number, because I think that's what the manufacturers quote. So, you need to rotate the stack and test in multiple positions, because a 3-stack motor doesn't pull evenly. There are 3 great big lumpy pieces as part of its rotation. You feel that when you turn a motor over. So if you're going to do stall testing, be careful, otherwise you might end up with lots of smoke and a broken motor.
Can I just ask, is it tea break yet?
Sure.
Yeah, we sent you away to put the kettle on.
I'll have to get a beer. See you in a minute, guys.
Okay, what I think is probably a good idea for RPM torque testing, much more than RPM. I would, if you are in the habit of running in your motors, we can talk about that, but I would do an RPM test of your motor first, just discern which way it runs best, and then I would run the motor in for a while. The biggest difference between equal motors and their torque values is how the brush mechanisms and the brushes face up with the comp.
Okay, Chris, so how do you run in your motors? What's the procedure that you have? Can you share? Or
Sure. Running in motors does one basic thing and one peripheral thing. Start with the peripheral thing. Basically, it will run in the bushings a little bit, which you don't really want to do, because in the perfect world, they would have been aligned perfectly in the first place, and running them in only wears them out. Secondly, the running in motors, we started doing this, God, I don't know, 35 years ago with high-end motors. And after what running in the motor does, it creates a nice smooth surface on the brush and the comp. And so the more concentric your comb and the smoother the brushes touch, and the more they touch the segment of the comb, the more torque you'll get and the better the motor will run. So the biggest thing in running in motors is to figure out a way to shape the motor brush so it consistently meets the surface of the comb without, and the big proviso here is without arcing. Any arcing will cause pitting of the comb, and that'll cause you problems down the road. So how can I mean, in a perfect world, what you will do is you mechanically break in your motors, no electricity. So I will hook up a flexible Dremel line on a Dremel tool and attach that to the motor shaft and spin spin the motor in the direction it's going to be from my prior test, and then mechanically spin the armature. So I'm introducing no electricity, and I'm introducing no potential for pitting of the comm on that thing. When guys talk about running underwater, they also talk about running in lemon juice or vodka and half a beer and half a scotch and all, like, you know, sperm whale.
What a waste of good alcohol, man.
Sperm whale tears and all kinds of stuff. All the fluid does is it adds a little bit of lubrication between the brush face, and it eliminates or cuts down drastically on arcing. So when you see guys say, I ran my motor in for 15 minutes at 5 volts and 15 minutes at 12 volts, that is, sad to say, has no bearing on reality whatsoever. So if you can let your motor, if you want to run it on a power supply, just let it tick over slowly. That will cause the brushes to conform with the comm the best they can. These aren't great comms. And that's the best thing you can do. Once you've done that for, you know, if you're running them dry, maybe half an hour. If you're running them underwater, maybe 20 minutes. Blow them out. You can give them a quick shot inside with some contact cleaner. Dry them off with a hair dryer. Make sure they're nice and dry, and just a smidgen of oil. But all of the, you know, whale tears and lemon juice and isopropyl, like all the other concoctions, don't make a bit of a difference.
So
basically, and anyone
you
ever
say
bought brushless motors?
Sorry?
Brushless motor.
Yeah, well, we don't run this. That's a whole different scenario.
Now let's leave that conversation out.
Yeah.
Gio, what were you going to say?
We did actually do it a few weeks back, didn't we?
Yeah. What was
we did.
Gio a second here. Go ahead, Gio.
It's just like a stupid remark in the sense that, so basically, Chris, you're saying that it should be like at the lowest voltage running the motor.
Yes. And what you can do if you're running your motor, sort of like, and if it's got some holes in the can, sort of like look in there. And if you're getting sparks, which is arcing, reduce the voltage, because all of those arcs are burning the brush and pitting the comm, which is not what you want to do.
So yeah, I mean, my procedure then is kind of partially wrong, because what I do is I run dry the direction that I want the motor to run. So I start with the lowest settings. So let's say I think it's around the 3 to 4 volts.
Okay.
For 15 minutes. Yeah. And then basically after 15 minutes, I go to, sorry guys, my cook. So then I move to 6 volts and I do for 5 minutes, 9 volts for another 5 minutes, and then 12 for 5 minutes. So basically I've been screwing up all my motors. Thanks, Chris.
I mean, the thing about these motors, they're all
necessarily bad. But the main thing is you really mustn't let your brushes arc. It doesn't matter whether you're running them in dry or running them in a fluid. We can talk about fluids a little later, but don't run your motors to the point where you can see the brushes arc against the comm, because then it's going to start cutting concentric arcs into the comm, and that's going to do the comm damage and slow it down. Bear in mind that running in a motor does not improve the motor. It doesn't make the motor better, it makes the motor older. Okay, what you're trying to achieve is that perfect sweet point where the bushes of the motor and the brushes and the commutator are just at that point, just before it blows up and gives up the ghost, right? You're just, you're taking age off it. It's like you're a newborn baby, but nothing worthwhile is going to happen in your life until you're like 21 years old and you discover alcohol and women or something. So you're just a shortcut that you don't need it. What you're trying to do is to get to the motor. You're trying to get to that motor to the point where it's at optimal race performance in a short time. So you're shortening the life of the motor by doing this.
I think Alan's just admitted he was a late starter.
And that's okay.
Alan said a lot of things in that sentence.
I mean,
Giovanni, it won't take much for you to get 2 motors nose to nose with their motor shafts pointing to one another, slip over a piece of silicone tube, run the slave motor, run it as fast as you like, You won't be causing any arcing in the other motor.
I was just about to ask Chris that exact question, Wayne. Thanks.
That is if you look at Tamiya 4-wheel drive, which is that kind of slot car racing where the slot is the width of the car. Anyone familiar with that? They run on where they drop the car into a channel and it runs around and around the channel.
Yeah.
If you research that stuff online on the YouTube, there's lots of motor running. They use the FC 130 motor too. That was the important point. And if you research that sport, there's a lot more content online about running stuff in, and I'm not just talking motors. I'm talking gears, transmissions. The whole sport has got a lot more content than slot car racing does. And the common method for running in for them, and they're the same as slot car racers. With your whale sperm and your angel's tears, they'll do all of that. But you just can't get around the fact that what you're actually doing is wearing the brushes with the com, and those two are the ones that are going to work together in the future. And you can't beat having no electricity there.
Yes.
Good stuff. Sounds like the first part of your run-in was an okay way to do it, not necessarily optimum, but good. And then all the speeding up stuff was unnecessary.
Zero advantage, like no need to do that at all.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Nevertheless, Giovanni, you shouldn't feel bad, because I suspect that even if you do adopt the non-electricity method, you won't actually find much of an improvement, if any, in your motors.
Wait, I was just kidding, man. I mean, it's okay. I mean,
yeah, you haven't really ruined them. You've just taken them.
I know. I mean, yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
I think one of the things that can really ruin a motor is actually heat.
No, I think what can really ruin not the motor but the race, it's the driver. So I am kind of the limit at the moment.
So you're the limit of the motor.
Yeah, I'm the limit of the whole package, actually. Yeah.
Perhaps we should run you in with no electricity then.
Yeah, well, at our club, we always say that crash was caused by the knob on the end of the throttle.
Yeah.
Which is the most important nut on the car. So it's screw on the car, the nut that's holding the controller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Chris, that was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
My golf coach always used to tell me it's same idiot at the end of the club.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how good the club is.
Yeah, have the best club in the world.
If any of you guys really want to learn about motors, there is a website called Slot Blog.
Yeah.
And
sorry, what was the name again, Chris?
Slot Blog, SLOT.
Oh, Slot Blog. Yeah.
And that's pretty much habitated by some pretty serious slot racers. Stewie Coford goes on there, and Stu Coford knows more about slot motors than basically any. Actually, Stewie Coford started off making slot car motors and got so good at it that NASA approached him to develop the world's first brushless motor. So Stewie knows a lot about motors. So there's a lot of motor break-in stuff and things like that. So.
Great recommendation. Yeah, Slot Blog. I don't go to it much, but I've heard of it. It's certainly got lots of good information.
Yeah, it's not for 90% of the stuff that we do here, plastic racing. It's but there's some technical things on motors, and if you're breaking in double wind 25 gauge motor with 9-piece cobalt magnets on it, it's no different than breaking in a 25-cent motor from Sun or Mabuchi. It's the same principles that apply.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions about motor configurations and breaking in?
I've got a question.
Well, just as a final thought, I mean, you when you order motors, and I've ordered lots of motors over the years for guys from Sun and Mabuchi, and when you talk to them, they have a plus or minus on any given motor. So there's a big variance in what you can get in a motor. So if you are, have a motor that is at the end of the field and you think you're going to break it in for 5 minutes and all of a sudden it's going to turn into a Ferrari V12, it's not going to happen. You can improve the consistency of the motor. You can improve a few things, the electrical efficiency of the motor. But if it's just not fast, it's just not fast. It's just, not going to happen.
I totally agree with that, Chris. I keep hearing people say things like, well, if you take your junk motor and dip it and do this and do that, you'll make it. If you gear it better, you'll make it. My rule is if it's rubbish, it's rubbish. Throw it away.
There's just, I use it at the shop. I'll test 20 or 30 motors, and
don't admit to this. Don't admit to this.
Yeah, the difference in a great motor and a bad, I mean, there's, plus 10, plus 12%, plus or minus, there's a big difference in what you can get out of the motors. And if I take one of the dogs, the only thing I can do, which is illegal, is take it all apart and change the timing and true the comm and shim the
Yeah, so how do you do that? Like, changing the timing and all this kind of stuff.
Well, it's very easy to do, but I'm not going to tell you because I do that I actually don't build armatures. There's guys who build armatures for me now because that's all they do and they're great at it. So I will specify a stack length, a stack diameter. I will specify what kind of a wind I want. I will specify what kind of comm timing I want.
But these are for the standard motors that we use, or for those high-spec motors?
No. These are for 250,000 RPM motors and the armatures are a couple of $100 US each. It's so far away from what we do. And to be honest with you, one overlying thing on motors, for all of you guys that race at clubs, the last thing on your mind should be the bloody motor. There's so
this is what you said the last time. So
how you prepare your tires, how you set up gear mesh, how you weight the car, most importantly, how you drive the bloody thing are all more important than, geez, I picked up 50 RPMs on my motor.
That reminds me of a conversation. I posted in one of the Facebook groups a picture of a digital chip installation. And it was
here we go.
Our car, and it was
the wiring on that car.
The wires were too heavy.
It was the stock wiring, so it was just an example of an easy chip job. Yeah. And responses were good job and well done and all that. But there were some people who were like, oh my God, I would totally strip out all that wire and run them in just the perfect place and have them be the exact length they need to be. And I'm like, man. My ultimate response was the time that I would spend doing all that to save a gram of wiring would be much better spent with my finger on the trigger driving that car around the track.
Can I throw out a new question? It's kind of it's a relevant topic, but I think it's completely different to what we've been discussing. I wanted to ask, has anyone got any big race meetings in the near future? Anyone got any? I've noticed that the commercial slot car tracks in the States appear to be posting action shots on Facebook and whatnot. They appear to be reopening. Are there any race meetings on the calendars that anyone's aware of yet?
Yeah, take a look at the states that those are happening in. And if they're wearing masks, that's a pretty good indication of the status of those locations. But
as of next week, apparently you can go to Mississippi and Texas and do whatever. You can go to any commercial track you want, but you go ahead first and you tell me how you made out.
No.
Yeah, I feel the fear, but I just wondered whether any of the the perennial annual events, like for example the big 24-hour races they run in Italy and things like that, where anyone knew whether or not they were scheduling.
But with the bloody COVID, nothing is happening, man. Especially right now in Italy, that is like week by week, a city goes or region goes from, they have color levels. So they might go from lockdown to semi-open to lockdown again. So I don't think that anyone, even like Italians that are crazy for logistic, will do something like that. I mean, organize an event, a big event, because might be not gonna happen. So
until
Wayne,
the
I
whole
can
country
answer one
gets their
question
jab,
for
that's
you.
not
I can
happen.
answer one question for you, Wayne. Rockingham are putting out feelers for a digital race, 6-hour digital race that's going to happen at the end of May. So, that's one, so be aware
Exactly
of
the end
that.
of July, Alan.
Yeah, end of July.
so
Okay.
has it been moved or?
Ready?
No,
Well, I clearly got
No.
the message confused then, but there's a digital race that they're putting feelers out for teams later on. So
Yeah, it's
there
July.
are, and also in November, I think Molesey have got the NSR 8689 championship, the F1 championship that they delayed from last year. So some of those things that were delayed from last year have been put into the calendars. And I think in the UK, everybody's thinking that this is really going to happen. So, once the vaccine hits a certain amount of penetration, then we're thinking that we're getting back to, racing again for sure.
Maybe you're gonna get like a vaccine passport, so you can move around with that problem.
Well, our government is considering that at the moment. We don't know what the outcome of that is. But I don't think there's any harm in beginning to plan these events, perhaps even scheduling them. For Christ's sakes, when the lockdown started, there were a whole summer of 2020 events that were scheduled that then had to be either postponed pending the outcome of the pandemic. And it turns out that none of them actually ran. I know that some sports that involve little to no social distancing actually did resume in summer 2020, and in particular I'm thinking about rallying, motorsport, full size. Some of that did occur, so I'm beginning to wonder whether or not, as people have mentioned, once the pandemics or once the injections have gotten far enough particularly in the UK, it's actually time to consider scheduling things for later this summer.
I would just be like, I mean, if you look at all the faces at the top of the screen here, none of these guys look like they're the best kind of guys to get COVID at this point in time. So,
I'm in the same group.
Caution all you guys. I like talking to you every week, and I'd like to talk to you for a few more weeks. So, be safe.
I hope it's gonna be years, man.
Hope many years, right? What were you going to say, Petrucci?
I said I've had my first injection.
Good job. I've got nothing.
Waiting for the next one. I was just wondering, what about swap meets? When can we get some
Same situation.
swap meets going?
Yeah. Same thing.
Some of those have already been scheduled for in the States. I think there's one coming up soon.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to go. I'm just saying that I think they've already started to, it'll be an expensive swap meet for us to attend, but I think they've already got some in their books. It's scheduled.
Again, in Texas and Mississippi, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like you said,
Or
people are posting pictures of racing indoors, no masks. There's going to be places that do not give a crap about restrictions, and they're going to do that kind of thing anyways. So, yeah.
Well, it would be naughty for them to do that if it was against the government guidelines at the given time, because they're posting their own evidence.
Hey, yeah, well, some of those locations don't have government guidelines for them to follow, and some of them do, and the people still don't care, and the governments won't do anything because freedom. So,
Right. Ask President Rick Scott.
Yeah, God, no. And that topic aside, anybody else got anything for the last 10 minutes of the chat? Or should I go ahead?
Oh, Chris was talking about, so going back to motors. So Chris was saying something like, no? Who say no?
No, go ahead.
I just said,
So Chris, you were saying that basically you have like, in the shop, you check like 20 motors, and then if you have some kind of, the next step was that maybe if you have some motors that are not performing at the level of the others, then you play with the timing. These are with the standard,
No, I said if in order to fix those motors, I would have to take them all apart.
Okay.
Chances are I would have to realign the can bearing and the end bell bearing. The motor shaft may not be perfectly straight. The comm may be out of true. The brushes may not intersect the comm properly. But in the type of racing in this plastic, I can't do any of that. That's illegal for me to touch that stuff. I mean, you can do it. I can tell you how to open them up and do all the stuff, but
yes, please.
Most clubs don't allow that, and I think that's a good thing.
Giovanni, if you look at last week's slot chat, Dennis opened up a lot of motors, showed you how to open them, and showed you how to do some things inside, you know. But of course, once you flip the tabs show those wrinkles. It's clear you've opened it.
Right.
So if you're asking for how you do that, you know, without being detected, I don't think there really is a good way. And if there was a good way, no one's going to say it here, that's for sure.
No, I mean, so the idea would be just for me to understand how this works. I mean, I kind of, at the end of the day, as I said, I mean, like the limitation, especially in big races, it's me. So it will be just for me to understand what the hell is going on. But yeah.
There's all kinds of things you can do. A few years ago, when I was racing the IMCA races, which is all 24 scale hard bodies with the playfit type chassis and Michael Nemus and those kind of chassis, we all used Fox 10 motors. And halfway through, we all started putting Fox 10 motors in vices and crushing the sides of the cans to reduce the air gap between the magnet and the armature shaft, which gave us a little more torque.
During the race?
Sorry?
During the race?
No, it was hard to get the motor out of the car and into a vice during the race. You'd have to sort of do this before the race.
Okay. So, okay. Why? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Stupid. Yeah.
But it came to everybody's attention that everybody was playing silly bugger, which was, and more guys ruin more motors because if you try, as you crush the sides, you distort the can end and the end. Yeah. So you get more torque. Unfortunately, you've just distorted the bushings so much that the bloody thing won't go around and around in circles. So there's all kinds of things you can do with motors, but.
Chris, I was going to ask, isn't twisting the slip ring to advance it or retard the timing? Don't you get a massive failure rate if you try that?
Yeah, because they don't. If you know when Dennis opened them up, if you've opened up a bunch, they're 10-cent motors, and you've got 10-cent brush gear, which is just junk. I mean, it's when I say it's junk, they're miracles of modern science that you can take a little Scaly S can and run it for ages and ages and ages, and it just keeps going. Despite themselves, they're toy cheap little 10-cent motors.
I pay $20 for those motors, man. So you keep saying to 10 cents. I'm gonna kind of, well, next time I see Mauricio, I'm gonna headbutt him.
Yeah, they're not. They're amazing little things. They're incredible motors.
Chris,
Chris said it well earlier, though, when you said, you know, he said motors should not be the top of your list. And I mentioned this last week. It's like motors don't even make the top 4 for me. Traction is king. Get your tires to work better on the track. Handling, does the car feed back to you so you can get it around the track? Reliability, is it going to make it to the end of the race? These are way higher concerns than motors. In fact, working your gears and making sure that they're bedded in nicely, the axles are nice. All of these things should be much, much higher on your list than more power. More power is right down the bottom of the list. And the clubs I go to where people come to me and ask me about these things, oh, Alan, your cars are so quick. It's like, don't really. The motor is the last thing. If you put a fast motor in a bad car, you're just making a bad situation worse.
Yeah, those are like those cars that come in the proxy that are the bottom groups. I mean, so basically, you know, making an effort for taking a car out of the box and to make go as shit as some of those at the bottom of the group of the proxy. That I've seen something that is really, some stuff that you know, you have to do an effort. You really put an effort into it in order to make it go so badly. But yeah.
Chris, can I ask, when you put those Fox motors in the vise, would that turn them into the flat 10?
Well, you got to, you got to be careful, and that's why the motors that we talked about over the last couple of weeks. That's why we got involved with the guy in the States from ProSlot to develop a series of rebuildable motors, with the baseline being around that Fox performance, so we wouldn't have to play silly bugger and go through all the cheating and all the rest of the stuff.
I think crushing a can in a vise, I think anybody could spot that that had been done right. So it's not really a very effective cheat.
Well, it actually is, Alan, because if you think about it, I mean, all you're trying to do, because as magnets get closer, magnetism squares with distance. So you really don't have to make much of a difference to get those magnets a tiny bit closer. And in that level of racing, a tiny bit was a tiny bit. It all can.
The set of calipers in the hand of a scrutineer, and the fact that the can looks as though it's distorted and it's got vice teeth marks in it. Bit of a giveaway.
Yeah, but
you can put pieces of, you can get creative and
yes, exactly, yeah.
Do lots of things, but it was all silly bugger, and those are the kind of things, quite frankly, that ruin a different set of things, but things like that ruined slot car racing in the late 60s, and they can ruin it again today if we get too stupid over stuff.
Yeah, and another thing, like, you know, at the beginning, we're talking about the, you know, how we run different clubs and the fees, and, you know, like having also prize money. I think it's something that over here, basically, there is no such culture having prize money at the end of the races.
Mm-hmm.
And because already people do stupid things in order to win without prize money, imagine what they would do if there were prize money involved. So I'm really happy, yeah, so that we don't do that.
I think that's called Formula One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our clubs now do not, our basement club racing group, which is 10 to 12 tracks, all wood tracks, we do not have season championships anymore. We have individual race winners. So Greg won last week and John won this week, and good for you, because when we had the championships, the guys who were at the top and had a potential to win that championship, the impetus to do something a little shady grew. And on the other end of the spectrum, the 3 or 4 guys who had no chance of winning the championship wouldn't show up.
Yeah.
It really made no sense for us to do that stuff. So we get together now, we talk about, you know, who's bought a new stove for the kitchen and how are the dogs, and we have a coffee, and then we have a slot car race, and that's it. And you know, I mean, all of us are on this chat line, and everybody says they do it for fun, which I agree to a point. But I would maintain that there's something wrong with every face I see out there, because everyone wants to win, not lose.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's fun when you're winning, right? You do for fun when you're winning.
Right. Absolutely. I have a lot of fun when I win. I don't have much. So it's, you know, everybody wants to be competitive. So, and some more than others.
The skill is in having fun when you're not winning, because if it's not fun, then you stop. So if you can't win, then you don't want to be stopping. So you need to find the ways to have the fun despite not winning.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm in Toronto, which is the 4th largest city in North America, a city in the GTA, which is about 7 million people. And I can name the 50 to 60 guys that are active slot racers in a city of 7 million, you know, so we can't afford to lose too many.
No, for sure. One of the things that I in this is I've got a bunch of cars with the other 2 guys that I race with, because I don't have very many around. I'll get cars that are within a tenth of each other, and we'll shake dice, and the guy with the highest gets the first choice, and second and on. And we've had really, really close races. Last last week we had one that I finished a half inch in front of the one of the other guys. It was great. And there's nothing better than having a very, very close race where you really have to work it. And sometimes it's hit strategy with us, and sometimes it's fuel. One particular car will run with less fuel than another. How you drive, of course, is making a big difference. But yeah, that's for me the fun of it. It's not so much whether I win, but it's how close I can get. You know, if you can make it close, still win is a little bit better. But I mean, the close races are much better than the runaways. A lot of times, if we're having runaways, we'll just abandon the race because it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When the power goes off and your car coasts just past your villains and you've beaten him in the coasting section at the end of the race, that's just so thrilling.
All right. Yeah, I lost the 124th race that way. I was ahead and he coasted past me afterwards, and that inch was enough.
And you see, that's a preparation because the gear mesh and the alignment of the bushes was not as good as the other guy or girl.
Well, actually, it was the knob behind the wheel.
Great, Greg. That was a great circle back to end the recording with. So I'm going to hit the stop button. Until next time, everybody say bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.